The reason that everyone's kind of thrown that out the window today is because it's been taken for granted that, oh, this is what the woman does or this is what the man does, and it's never been explained to people or reasoned, or people have never thought it through for themselves as to why that might be a good idea. And in certain relationships, it's not a good idea. And so when people have seen that fail, or they haven't seen the thought process to why that should be a good idea, they just go, oh, well, this is rubbish, throw it out.
Throw the whole thing out. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Living Fullness. I'm Stina Constantine, and joining me on the podcast today is Elise Drum. Each week you'll hear us chat about a range of topics from virtue to relationships, comments on cultural shifts and lessons that we're learning as we go along, and we are so happy to have you join us. So sit back and enjoy being part of a conversation with a couple of friends. How are you going, Elise?
I'm well, thanks, Stina. How are you?
I'm doing well. How have things been? What have you been up to?
I've been doing placement in emergency at the moment, so learning a lot very fast about my future career and loving every second of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. So we had you on a little while ago, and thanks for coming back to co-host. Really appreciate it, not leaving me here by myself. But also, some of our community might not know that you're a medical student.
Yes. Yeah. 5th year, 5th of 6. So on the home stretch now and really getting into it. Yeah. How's your week been?
Yeah, good. Mine has been really good. It's been a bit of a slower week, which has been really nice. The past few weeks have been super hectic, where there's just been like meeting after meeting after meeting, and like one place to another. And I've only given myself 10 minutes to get from like one place to the other. So it's nice to have a bit of a slower week for a change.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So this week's episode, we're having a bit of a chat about expectation management in relationships.
Sounds very technical.
I think it's an interesting topic because it's so vague. There's little clarity around what you should and shouldn't expect in a relationship. And I'd love to be able to say that most of us walk into relationships without any expectations, but that's just not true. We all walk into relationships, like all kinds of relationships, from work relationships to like romantic relationships to friends. We all walk in with our own experiences and our own ideas about what this relationship should look like. So I think it'd be really good for us to pull this apart a bit.
Definitely.
What do you think might be some common like friction points when it comes to expectations in relationships?
I think a big one is probably the so-called societal expectations, or the examples that are set either within our own family or in the media, or, you know, in the books and the movies that we're seeing. I think they really heavily influence expectations now. You even hear people sort of make comments about, oh, like, can I send this text without an emoji? Or does that mean, or will they think that I'm angry?
Yeah.
Like, weird things like that. So I think, they're changing constantly. And if, you know, people obviously have different expectations, because there's some people that will send a text without an emoji and they think, what do you mean? I wasn't mad. I was just not going to move my thumb 3 more times.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. I was just answering as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So I suppose, your experiences and just the different places that people come from have a huge friction point.
Yeah, definitely. Which comes back to those experiences that we each have and what they mean to us as well as we walk into a relationship. So, you know, even just talking about like the emoji stuff, that can so easily be misinterpreted as not caring.
Yeah.
Like in exactly as I was saying, like for me that might be, or it's just the quickest way to respond. But for another person it could be, well, you're not actually taking time to respond. Do you even want to be in this conversation? Like, does this conversation even matter? Like, so many layers of interpretation can happen purely because of two very different ideas about what's going on.
Yeah.
What about in terms of, like we were talking before we recorded, that if we're talking about romantic relationships, society expects now that healthy romantic relationships will mean that both people in those relationships have the exact same role. Like, there's an expectation now that that's what it means to have a healthy relationship, which is completely opposite to what traditional values would say, or traditional views would say around around this space? Like what are your thoughts around roles in relationships?
Yeah, I think it's still like it's not concrete and it's not hard and fast. It's not this is how it should be for everybody. I think it's different for everybody. But I think that if you're going to have expectations for a person in a relationship based on their gender or whatever have you have to have a reason for it. And I think the reason that everyone's kind of thrown that out the window today is because they haven't, again, it's been taken for granted that, oh, this is what the woman does or this is what the man does, and it's never been explained to people or reasoned, or people have never thought it through for themselves as to why that might be a good idea. And in certain relationships, it's not a good idea. And so when people have seen that fail or they haven't seen the thought process to why that should be a good idea, they just go, oh, well, this is rubbish, throw it out.
Throw the whole thing out.
Throw the whole thing out. And, they see, a traditional idea of, maybe the man managing the finances, which is perhaps for some people really great because dad's an accountant, so why wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Whereas, there are other relationships where dad there's no way he could find that paperwork. Obviously not.
Yeah.
So, I think when those sort of gender roles become hard and fast, or when there's not an appropriate reflection on why, I think that's where it becomes a bit ridiculous. And so, I think it's completely acceptable to have expectations, but to have a reasoning and an understanding of why.
And I think what you're saying there too about that reflection is key, because our world has changed and continues to change. And so even looking back on, our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and the roles that they would have had in their relationships, the way that we can talk about, all sorts of different political viewpoints around how we might have this, around what might have been happening. We can talk about oppression, we can talk about power, what this, that and the other. And there were obviously, as there are now, there were back then abusive relationships as well. Not every relationship was healthy. But for the ones that were, they would have had particular roles, not only because of systematic stuff that was going on, but because these were their best skill sets and they were using they were using their strengths. They were playing to their strengths, which worked for their time and may not work quite as well for our time, which is also okay if we're able to reflect, like you're saying, reflect on why you would have this particular role in the relationship or a particular role in this season of that relationship, because that can change as well. Like,
oh yeah, it's so circumstantial, and it's weird that it brings up a thought, like thinking about like great grandparents and things like that. My great grandparents who were from Holland, they would have had that traditional looking family before the war where dad was the breadwinner. But when push came to shove and survival kicked in, he had to hide in a cupboard so he wasn't taken away to a camp, and his wife was the breadwinner, getting everything for the family, so that he could still be there to help them, but, undercover essentially. So it really depends on, your circumstances and the needs of the family. And, if it puts a lot of pressure on both men and women sometimes because their family doesn't fit the status quo. And I like what my dad has often said to me. He said, law was made for man, not man for law.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of, just sort of really applies to that, in that you need to use your logic and reasoning for each situation.
Yeah. And then not be afraid and not worry about, any judgments that might bring about, because like you said, it's not the status quo. Well, too bad. It works for your family. It works for your relationships.
Yeah. And if there is, I suppose, like playing devil's advocate, if there is something that's sort of traditionally expected of men or traditionally expected of women, still like reflect on why that might not be possible. Is it because, you're not living out your full masculinity or femininity?
Yeah, 100%.
It goes both ways. Are you not sort of, allowing, sometimes by taking on that role, are you actually inhibiting the other person from reaching their full potential? So it's it's a tug of war, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, what you're talking about now is love within a relationship, because it's not just about what we receive, it's also about what we give and holding space for the other person to flourish as well, which you like in a good, healthy relationship, that's what happens. There's a toing and froing and a shared space. I'm not talking physical space, but like, you know what I mean? Like an actual shared holding of a place where the other person can grow. And that's where a flourishing relationship happens, is when you can have that fertile soil and the room to actually grow in that.
Yeah.
Another point I think also very common is communication. I think sometimes with different values that we might hold, the friction point becomes when we don't actually talk about, something that may have transpired that grates on our values. And we kind of go, well, I don't understand why they do that thing, or they say that thing, or they think in this particular way. I don't get it, because that's just not what relationships should look like, coming from our own experience and the desperate need to actually have to communicate that as well. Any thoughts on conflicts with values?
Yeah, I think again, like being prepared to defend your values or to reason your values and say, well, this is why this is important to me, is always important. But like you said, communication is everything, and it's and you can get a great example from the movies at why relationships break down, because people don't communicate.
It's
because
so true.
Oh, he'll be so sad and I'll let him go on that thing and I'll hold my grudge for the next 3 months
Resentment.
instead. Yeah. And it's such a sign of either a real personal sort of instability or insecurity, or it's a sign of a really unhealthy relationship if you can't bring up that value or that concern openly and freely. So it's either a problem with you or them or the relationship itself, and regardless of which one it is, pretending it's not there is not going to help. So you have to either address what the issue is and raise the concern, or you're not moving forward. And speaking like from personal experience, bringing up an issue or saying, well, this is important to me and I want you to understand that it's important to me, 9 times out of 10, it's not the big scary conversation that you think it's going to be. It's going to be I didn't realize it was that important to you, or I didn't realize you felt that way, or okay, what can we do to reconcile this? Like that's what it should sound like. But I think we always think of worst case scenario in our heads for some reason.
Yeah. And when you make a habit of not telling the other person, it makes sense that you would fear what's going to happen, because it's been built for so long.
Yeah.
You don't know how to have that conversation where that conflict might happen. So you just avoid.
Yeah. And it can come from a good place. It can come from not wanting to be a nag or not wanting to be an inconvenience. But if it's not going away, then it's not obviously not an appropriate coping mechanism.
Exactly. Yeah. So true. And communication is everything in that. But also vulnerability as well. It's communication and vulnerability, being willing to risk the awkward, the uncomfortable, the what if they don't agree, what if they don't understand, what if they don't accept, all those things. But if you're not true to yourself, can you really be happy in a relationship with somebody else? Like,
do you provide people advice on how to approach those conversations and word those conversations?
Well, in my couple sessions, I tell them to have the conversation here. Like I will just go, let's just do it. What do you want to talk about? Okay, let's talk about it. And I don't give them words as much as I give them tools for how they can listen to the other. Because often communication, what I find is tricky with couples, is not that. Very, very rarely will I have a couple who's not communicating at all, sometimes, but very rarely. Most of the couples are communicating, but they're just talking at each other. They're not actually listening to each other. It's like, no, that's not how communication works. It's not a one-way street. You can't just talk at someone and expect that they'll understand what you're talking about, because you're in it together. So you have to have a to and a fro. There has to be a coming back as well. So most of the time it's actually spending time teaching them how to listen and show that they're listening not only in their body language, but also repeating back to them and comprehending what they're actually saying. Like, have you actually understood what's happening here?
And not preparing their next argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That tends to be where most of the work that I tend to do around communication with my couples. Yeah. So I guess in terms of managing some of these expectations then, like how do we, obviously communication is one of the things that we use, but how do we actually manage the expectations that we might have?
I suppose when they first, like when a conflict first arises, not jumping to a conclusion or jumping to a this is a no-go sort of thing. I suppose if you've already reflected on it and you've reached that conclusion, then sure, you can have that this is a non-negotiable. But sometimes, like, I think a lot of the conflicts or the differences that arise aren't always major ones. They're ones where you have a differing opinion or a differing, this is how I think this should go. And then you have to decide, okay, does this mean this much to me? And is this something that is this the hill I'm going to die on? Yeah. Or is this something that I can negotiate? And just sort of deciding for yourself, sitting back, is this worth something bringing up? Because like you can have your big issues, but you can have little issues feel like big issues as well, and think this is do or die. Yeah. When it actually, sometimes you do have to be a bit comfortable with, okay, we're actually not reaching agreement here, but can we move past it? And there's some things that, yes, you can. Yeah.
Which even in the moment may not feel like you can, but if you're able to reflect and be okay, then perhaps this is one of those things that you can let go of.
Yeah. And also realising that maybe it's not a one conversation issue. It might be one that you both have to come back to several times, and that's also okay. And it probably is a good idea because it means you've had time to think about it and you're not just going the jugular and rising to the heat of the moment.
And gives you opportunity to actually learn about the other person as well. If there's a toing and froing, as frustrating as it may feel if it goes on for a long time, same conversation over and over again, it's generally, if you're listening, you'll actually learn something new.
Yeah.
Because they're bringing something to you that has been unresolved. So they're going to bring something new to you. They're not going to bring the same thing because that's a battle that didn't get them anywhere.
Yeah.
They're always going to bring something new.
Yeah. And if you're receptive to that, then they're going to be more comfortable the next time to bring something forward, because there might be, we've already said, like, you can have that insecurity that they're going to reject you for this. So if you're not going to be receptive to their issues, they're not going to bring them up, and they're not going to be receptive to yours.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely right. Deciding to pick the battles as well is what you were talking about as well, whether this is the hill that you want to die on or not. But I also think it's important for us to have an idea of this type of standard of relationship that we're actually looking at too, and being okay with being in a good enough relationship, because I think, and I don't want to mistake that by saying let's have low standards. That's not what I'm talking about. Like, we should have high standards of, respect and honesty, honor. Like, we should expect all those really good things, but also be okay with the fact that you may not have a relationship that is going to be perfect.
No.
That you won't have a relationship that will be without conflict. Like, conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict becomes a bad thing when someone's literally being hurt. When abuse is involved, then it's a bad thing. But conflict itself is not a bad thing. It just means that you're two different people. Wow, wonderful. That's what we want. So that's not a bad thing. But also accepting that, hey, maybe I can have a normal relationship, and normal means it's good enough. It's not perfect.
Absolutely. You're just each other's cheerleader at the end of the day. Like, it's so, people say things like, I hate conflict. And I'm like, well, no one likes conflict, but isn't it sometimes a little bit fun to have a difference of opinion, to have something new, to have a problem to work through, and to also, if someone identifies that this is an issue for me, if you truly love them, you want to work through it, and you want, you've both established that, okay, this is a virtue that we regard as important, but this is one that we both struggle with, or that one person struggles with, then isn't that such a privilege to be able to help someone through that?
Yeah.
Or to have, not be alone, to have someone who's accountable with you. Like, it's not it shouldn't be seen as, it's kind of like in like a footy team. You've got different positions, but you're working towards the same goal.
Yeah.
Different skill sets, different attitudes, and need both of them.
Yeah. You're on the same team is what I tell all my couples. You're on the same team. So make sure you're actually acting like you're on the same team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not in two different places. It also makes me think about the things that are really important in a relationship as well. And that includes things like actually having a friendship with the person that you're in a relationship with, that you actually want to hang out with them, that you like spending time with them, which means that with any of our friends, we have different friends, like different people like different things. We might have some things in common, but we're not going to have everything in common with that person. And that's good. That's part of having a friendship with someone, learning those different things about them, honoring each other's dreams, like actually wanting to see the other person achieve what they want to achieve in life. Wanting to have dreams together is another big thing in a relationship. And then managing conflict is also really important, a really practical part of it, but also essential so that it doesn't become a relationship that is solely conflict-based. Yeah. You need to be able to manage those conflicts for exactly what you said. We can't escape them. Yeah. They're always going to exist. Yeah. Having mutual understanding and being able to compromise, that's another one that you was talking about as well. But then also being able to repair. I think we underestimate the importance of being able to repair when something has happened that has either hurt one or both people in a relationship. The ability to go back and go, that didn't go the way I would have liked to have done that. Can we redo that? I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Let me own that. That was on me.
Yeah, don't be on the defensive straight away.
Yeah, but also being able to say, hey, you hurt me.
Yeah.
Like it's also okay to say to them if they haven't seen it, if they don't know, they can't do anything about it. It's really important to be able to repair them. But all of that sits within like the boundaries of trust and commitment.
Yeah.
None of that is going to work without trust and commitment in the relationship. So just having like a reasonable expectation.
Yeah. Sometimes I find a really valuable opportunity to actually define those expectations or how you might approach them can also be being a bit proactive. And if you're open with that other person, when you see a situation that may not necessarily be in your relationship, addressing it. Like I often find that when you remove that personal aspect of it and you say, and you're not gossiping, but if you sort of see something and you go, I don't like how that person did that because that would make me feel like this, or I wouldn't stand for this because, and sometimes taking just examples of other relationships or situations can be a really good way of removing that personal, because that's where a lot of the time the friction comes from, removing that personal aspect and sort of saying, well, this is how I'd feel. What do you think? Or what would you do in this situation is a much more inviting way of also, I suppose, having those conversations.
It's a less confronting way. You can have it like a third party kind of conversation, observing a third party, but also giving insight into how you feel about it and allowing them to share how they feel about it too. It's a great way to learn together. Love it. Well, there you go. That was a bit of a deep episode there, Elise.
Not a bit more feely than the start, the technical description.
Yeah, true. Expectation management.
Sounds like a workplace safety day.
It does. Yeah. Well, we hope that you enjoyed this particular episode. If there was anything in there that you agreed with, disagreed with, get in touch with us and let us know. We love hearing from you. And we want to know, challenge us. If you think that we disagree on what's happening, do challenge us. So before we go, we might do a truth, beauty and goodness. Do you have one for us, Elise?
Yes. It's just started getting a bit cold and I hate the cold. But I got up the other morning and it was just kind of crisp cold and it was okay. And there was I got up early enough for a beautiful sunrise. The sky was just this gorgeous purple pink and the clouds were kind of like almost in little like squares, when they spread across the sky and it yeah, that pitch will get me through winter.
Oh,
It was beautiful. So that was my moment of hope
yeah.
approaching winter time.
Oh, as we're coming into winter. Okay.
Yeah. What was your moment this week?
For me, it was I did a mental health campaign recently. Took part in a mental health campaign recently, and I've spoken about mental health battles with all the deportation stuff that happened with me. I've spoken about that a couple of times on the podcast. And it was just really humbling to go back to a place where I could now use that story to help others to reach out and to just try and bring that stigma down of reaching out for help, especially as a mental health professional myself. Just being able to say, hey, we all have moments for different reasons.
Yeah.
Seek out that help. But then also walking away and going, ooh, some of that was a little bit triggering. This is good. I need to just kind of take a step back. So yeah, really, really humbling to know that God is still doing healing work in me. But also that, you know, there's some things that hit harder than others, and that makes me human.
Yeah. And it's great that you can use that experience and that pain essentially to help others in their pain.
Yeah. We'll certainly try to.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Elise, for joining me for another episode today.
Thank you, Stina. It's been great.
Oh, yeah, it's been really good. Well, hopefully we'll have you on here again soon. And thank you to everyone who's been listening from wherever you might have been listening from. Thank you for joining us each and every week. We will catch you again next week. But until then, know about love and prayers.